Welcome to Reaction. Today we're talking about Parliament, and I'm discussing this with David Davis. I'm really struck by the fact that we have a packed centre court, which is very nice to see, cheering on some great players, and we have increasingly packed football stadiums as England play in the Euros. You can see this around Europe throughout the tournament. But why is it then that we've landed up in this situation, David Davis, where sporting events are okay to be packed, but Parliament doesn't really function? It functions only with, I think, a maximum at the Speaker's discretion of 70 people in the chamber. How have we got into this situation where we don't really have a functioning Parliament?
Well, I think the actual answer is a series of irrational steps that have led us here. Although the scientists will probably say to you, well, the tennis and the football are primarily in the open air, and therefore there's less risk. But truth is, nearly everybody in Parliament, if not everybody, every MP has been double vaccinated by now, because of their age group, because someone's been involved in volunteering, all sorts of reasons. And of course, the thing to remember is that Parliament is designed to be packed. I mean, famously, when they rebuilt Parliament after it was bombed in the Second World War, the chamber of the House of Commons, Churchill was given the option of making it big enough for 650 people, or keep it at what it is at the moment, which has got I think it's got 450 seats. So when you have a big speech, a big occasion, then the aisles are packed. People are sitting on the steps. People are standing at the bar, and there's a real sense of occasion. It becomes like an animal. The Parliament itself responds to big speeches, big events, and so on. That's all gone. That's completely gone. I mean, in the last year, I've made a number of speeches which, in a properly meeting Parliament, would have had an impact. I mean, I've been there for those sorts of speeches, in, let's say, the defeat of David Cameron's attempt to bomb Syria, which was a big emotional occasion, and a number of us made speeches which had the effect of moving about 20 votes on the day. I was as you can imagine, very close to it. They can't do that at the moment. The idea of moving 20 votes in what is like a sort of exploded parish council, is just implausible. It just doesn't work. Yeah. And as well as the rhetorical effect of this, the sheer, you can't have powerful rhetoric under these circumstances. As well as that, there's no interplay. Most people are speaking via a video link like this, but unlike this, there's no backwards and forwards. It's simply a presentation to the chamber. Now, a huge part of the power of parliamentary debate is the ability, the to and fro, the challenge, the testing, the backwards and forwards. One of the reasons Parliament itself is so much more powerful than most other democratic institutions in the world is because we're opposite each other. We are talking to each other. We're not talking around a semicircle. All of that physicality, as it were, of the debate is incredibly important. So that's one big thing. The other big thing, which is incredibly important, is that politics is a marketplace. It's a marketplace of ideas at one end, and it's a marketplace of conspiracies at the other. Alliances and deal making and challenges, again, personal challenges. So if a minister is not responding to questions or not responding to letters, maybe, and Whitehall's past master at wasting time, you can catch them in the division lobby. They can't get away from you. It's like being in the marketplace on Saturday morning. They come and do their vote shopping, and there you are to catch them. So all of that almost biology of Parliament's gone.
So what do you say then, David Davis, to people who respond that, well, look, every other kind of workplace has had to adapt, and Zoom working, flexible working works for all sorts of other businesses, and this ensures that parliamentarians spend more time in their constituency. I don't agree with that position. I was, though, really surprised when I wrote a piece recently saying, let's try and get Parliament back properly. And only really a small number of your colleagues are animated about this question, it seems to me, and large numbers of the public don't really seem to bother. They think, well, why can't it be done on Zoom? It saves money. What are they missing?
Well, partly, the public at large conflate in their mind Parliament and government. They tend to think they're sort of the same thing, and I'm afraid your profession does it to a very large extent. They use Westminster and government as being interchangeable, and they're not. In fact, they're almost opposites. And so this is we're not talking about a parish council. We're not talking about, the local factory. We're talking about something which is actually important to everybody in the country. And as an example of that, I'll cast your mind back to the March 23rd of last year, which was the day that they moved the coronavirus emergency bill. They moved it through the House in one day. And what that did was it basically gave the government vast amounts of powers incidentally they could have had through existing emergency legislation. But the difference about that bill was it didn't require them to come back to Parliament. The Civil Contingencies Act, which is the previous big emergency legislation, and even the 1984, ironically, the 1984 Health Act, both require ministers, once they've done so, they can do things quite quickly, but they've got to come back to Parliament in 7 days to get Parliament's approval. It's all gone. And the effect of that is that when the government makes mistakes, nobody holds it to account. When the police were putting up a drone to spy on a couple walking in the Peak District, remember that? When all those ridiculous overuses of power that were going on around the place were happening, Parliament was really unable to get a grip of the government's measures and say, no, you've got to constrain that. You've got to put a common sense requirement into here. You've got to do this, that, and the other. And of course, one of the reasons that apart from his behavior, that Matt Hancock had everybody jumping on him, is he'd become incredibly unpopular in the last year because he'd been the architect of all these measures, and effectively there was very little limitation on him. So incredibly important for the running of the greatest peacetime crisis was done effectively without any challenge. It's made worse by the weakness of the Labour opposition on all this and so on. But even if the Labour opposition had been doing its job properly, it would have had trouble actually holding the government to account throughout all of it. So it's incredibly important. I cannot tell you how important this is, and we could have done something. By the way, we could have done things to make it practical, even before we were all being vaccinated. Why on earth do we not have a testing facility set up in Westminster Hall, which is a great big hall, which is not used for much, is where the Queen Mother sat in. Queen Mother was laid in state when she.
Yes, it's the oldest part of Westminster, the original Great Hall.
Grand Hall. We could have set up a testing station there from 7 o'clock every morning, and anybody wanting to come in to speak in the chamber could have gone and been tested every single day. But people said, "Oh, well, it would be making Parliament different to people." If we're doing our job, I think the people would be perfectly happy with being tested every day to come in, but that was rejected, of course, by the government.
When people challenge me on this, and I think it's extremely troubling that people are not more worried by the fact that we don't really have a functioning parliamentary democracy at the moment. And this will, by the time Parliament meets properly again, it'll be September the 6th. I think it is. I try and explain it to people by saying Parliament is not other. It shouldn't be alien. Parliament is us. It's the best thing we've got in terms of a bulwark against a mighty executive. But people tend not to see it in that way now. Is it also to do with the decline in the reputation of Parliament, do you think? So during the expenses crisis and various other crises, that people just think, well, why do you want parliamentarians back? They'll just sort of spend all their time drinking in subsidized bars. There is this great popular or populist dislike of Parliament.
Yeah, I'm sure that's right. But the British people are very sensible generally, but they don't waste a lot of time thinking about politics. That's why our system works the way it does. They elect us every few years and say get on with it, basically. But the answer to those people is ask yourself, has government in the last 15 months been notably good at what it's been doing? And apart from vaccines, the answer is plainly no. I mean, the number of mistakes, the number of heavy-handed uses of power, the number of times the state's really exceeded its remit is countless, is absolutely countless. If it had not been for Kate Bingham's action on vaccines, we would have been the worst affected country as in the world, both from the point of view of infections and from the point of view of economic damage. It was rescued by one measure, a very important measure. But so ask yourself, has the government worked well in that time? No, it hasn't. One of the reasons it hasn't worked well is because of the lack of challenge of Parliament. And this happens even before the minister gets in the House. If you are going to speak in Parliament, let's say make a statement or answer a debate, unless you are sort of a sociopath, you get nervous about it. You expect people to challenge you. You worry that they'll think of something you haven't thought of. And guess what? As a result of that, you do your homework better. The Whitehall, who's looking after you, as it were, also do their homework better. It's not good for the career of a civil servant if his minister ends up being embarrassed in Parliament because there's a question he hasn't thought of. Mm-hmm. And that happens every day of the week, that some minister has to face a challenge in Parliament, and as a result, Whitehall does its job better. And it's frankly, it's not just on coronavirus. It's noticeable across the board that the performance of Whitehall has declined in the last year. Now, some of that's down to people being at home as a result of COVID, working from home, and so on. But it shouldn't actually make the tax authorities slower to respond, or DWP slower to respond, but they are. I mean, I've seen it with my constituents time and time again, whether it's a small businessman or a single mum with a disabled child. They have to struggle harder to get an outcome. Now, if we had normal Parliament, we could have done more about that, because there's a cascade of other problems that come out of it. Let me give you another example. When we put in for questions, normally speaking, it's a fluid process. You have people who are on the order paper, but there are other people who are not on the order paper, not listed to ask a question, who can pop up and the speaker sees them and he calls them. And that's a process which has got no notice to it. You turn up and you do it. Whereas today, we have to have, if there's a so-called urgent question tomorrow, the person puts in their urgent question request today, which is granted for tomorrow. So already you've got a 24-hour lag. And I've got to know whether I've got an issue with that by 11 o'clock today. Well, in fact, already by today. If I haven't put my name in, I won't get called tomorrow. So this it's become a great ponderous sort of dinosaur-like thing. Government's become, you have to, if you kick the tail, it takes 20 minutes for it to get to the head, or in this case, it never gets there. Now that sort of fluidity, all the systems, all the mechanisms that make ministers nervous, make them responsive, they're all paralyzed at the moment.
Do you think there's a danger, though, that some of your colleagues and maybe some people who are newer to the Commons, and that there is a danger that bad habits are being established and that people think this is how Parliament should work, with the executive having more power, as you described? Because even when the government and the leader of the House has set aside, for example, 2 days on the reporting stage of the finance bill, and only a day was used because, for the reasons you described, contributing on Zoom is unsatisfactory and it doesn't lend itself to long speeches, and there was just a lack of demand. Now, when people say, well, why does that really matter? This is the finance bill. This is a state which is next year going to spend £942 billion of other people's money, quite a lot of it borrowed, not scrutinized. And the bill is, I think, I'm right in saying, almost 500 pages long, so not an exercise in tax simplification. So it's clear to me that the current setup doesn't work. Now, September the 6th, then, Parliament returns properly, we're told. What then needs to happen? I mean, the Speaker seems determined that it'll be a full functioning House of Commons with no rules and COVID restrictions. Hopefully that's the case. What needs to happen in practical terms, do you think, in terms of dismantling COVID legislation? What sort of measures do you think need to be taken by backbenchers to ensure that the architecture of COVID restrictions at least is dismantled? And then if the government has to ask for further powers later in the crisis, if there's a re-emergence of it, for example, in the winter, it has to do on a fresh basis rather than rolling over the existing rules.
Well, I mean, firstly, it's not a risk that this is going to continue to handicap Parliament. It's a certainty. I mean, a lot of the things are incredibly convenient. I mean, one of the problems in debate at the moment, in the old days, a year and a half ago, in a debate, the Speaker would call some of the more expert people, let's say an ex-Secretary of State for a subject or whatever, or somebody who knows a lot about, and they'll get 10, 15 minutes to speak. And then as you go further on, you get a bit less time, and some people won't get in, right? Well, at the moment, because all you have to do is switch on your Zoom and sit here like I am now. I'd have to wear a tie, but sit here like I am now and talk. The pressure of speaking in the chamber is gone. I could sit here and sort of read something. I have a piece of paper and read it, and you wouldn't be able to see I'm reading, although you can tell. But that means everybody puts in for everything. So nearly all of the debates now are 3-minute slots. They're basically people doing local paper press releases, really, not entirely, I'm being unfair, but to a very large extent. So the whole thing is very convenient. Being able to have a proxy vote. I exercise a proxy vote, but that partly is my sense of humour. I like making the Deputy Chief Whip go through the opposition lobby and vote against the government. But the simple truth is it's very, very, very convenient, and so we have to peel those back. Right now, that'll happen slowly, and it'll find a new settlement point. But don't underestimate the extent to which the government controls this. We say Parliament, but actually it's the government that controls it. I mean, you talked about the finance bill. I mean, I wanted to do some measures on the corporation tax increase and so on because I don't approve of it. But I couldn't put an amendment into that because we are limited on what we can do to amend the finance bill. Now, to be fair, that started under Hammond, under Philip Hammond, but it's carried on, and the ability to challenge that and get that put right has gone out the window too. So there's quite a lot of things to be done. Now, in terms of the measures, well, we're going to have to do a bit of hunting, frankly, because not everybody, I don't know all the measures that have gone through, because frankly, there's so many of them, and I've not been on the statutory instrument committee that's done it and so on. So we're going to get quite a lot of continual pressure, I guess, in the autumn on these matters. I mean, there's one that came up this week, for example, which you wouldn't have thought would be normal, but the sort of morning after a contraceptive pill, an abortion pill, really, was put through. The ability to give those out was put through during COVID because GPs couldn't see their patients. All right, fair enough for a while, but that's got to be put right, because otherwise you're going to have problems right than that. So things like that are going to have to be found, unveiled, and then pushed. And I think quite a lot of the autumn session is going to be about that. But
final question: it's going to take, isn't it, a great cross-party effort? I mean, on the Conservative side, obviously your colleague Mark Harper has been vocal on this as well, but on the Labour side, Chris Bryant has suggested that Parliament could have come back properly much earlier. It is going to have to be a collaborative, cross-party defence of the rights of Parliament, isn't it?
Yes, and truth be told, it always is. No party has a monopoly on the powers of Parliament. Bluntly, it tends to be the opposition normally. But if you know, there are people on both sides who do it. You know, and if you don't do it, I mean, what if you don't reinstate the ability of Parliament to hold the government to account, correct it, challenge it? You end up with something really like what you got in Scotland at the moment. You've got an absolutely overwhelming government, which is basically controls not just government, but much of the civic sector and so on, and a very weak parliament that's unable to challenge it, you know. Yeah. And the result you get is, you know, the government's not held to account for the things it's done wrong. And you say, well, we won't go down that route, but nevertheless, it's very serious. And it doesn't matter what the party in power is. I mean, the government always likes parliament to be weak. Whatever it says publicly, it always gets convenience, advantage, political benefit from a weak parliament, but that in turn undermines the effectiveness of government. In the long run's a bad thing. So yeah, you're going to get a cross-party effort on this. There's no doubt about that. And I don't know. I think we'll probably get back pretty much everything. But you know, when you fall into bad habits, it's quite hard to break them. Today, we're speaking on Monday, and in the afternoon, we've got a police bill. All right, it's got, I think from memory, about 120 amendments and 50 new clauses. We won't get around to talking about it until 5 or 6 this afternoon, and it'll be all over by 10. So you know, there's just no way we're going to get through all of that. And we've got into the habit of that. You know, people, all the new MPs think this is normal. You know, so you've got well over 100 MPs who just consider this to be normal. You know, whereas, you know, people who've been around for 20 years take a different view. So
because of course, obviously they had only experienced 3 months of Parliament before the shutdown began. So they were just getting acclimatized.
3 months of Parliament, including the Christmas break, and just the restart. Really, I mean, frankly, it's 1 month of operational Parliament. You know, and when you're a brand new MP, you're sort of wandering around the days trying to find out where the loo is, not working on parliamentary procedure. So they've got no real idea of what Parliament's like when it sits properly. One or two of them, to be fair to them, one or two of them said, you know, I feel like I've not yet become an MP because I haven't actually experienced this, you know. And frankly, bluntly, for many of them, it will be terrifying for a while. But it's supposed to be, you know. You look back down the ages, whether it's Macmillan or Churchill or whatever, if they had to make a major speech in Parliament, I mean, Churchill was unbearable. He had to dine alone, even before he did Question Time as Prime Minister, after being in the House for 30 odd years, you know. Macmillan used to get physically sick for 2 or 3 days before he had to make a major speech. That's how it should be. That's how you get the best out of us. Is, you know, it should be a testing experience, because the outcome decides the running of the country today and the future of the country for generations. And you get it wrong, you know, it's not like your local factory. It's not like your local shops. It's not like your parish council. This, you know, even though you may not notice it matters today, you and your children will notice when it makes mistakes in the future.
David Davis, thank you very much for joining us on Reaction. If you're not a subscriber to Reaction on YouTube, you just hit the subscribe button. If you're not a subscriber to the main site, visit the site and you can get a 30-day free trial. You get my weekly newsletter and all the brilliant journalism by the team. But until next time, thank you for joining us.